has been perhaps misrepresented to the buyer. And I do think buyers need to be very wary of throwing that term around, misrepresented, where you very rightly said earlier on, well, the horse is ready for EM dressage, and now a prelim buyer buys it and says, well, it can't do EM dressage.
I did it EM dressage and it did terribly.
Yes,
And you're
exactly.
like, can you ride at that level?
So I think there's that difference between misrepresentation and then fluctuation of reasonable abilities, which happens. And even then, even if you're a great rider, I've had this, sometimes you get on a horse and you look like an idiot because, you know, you're just speaking a different language. But if a horse has perhaps been willfully misrepresented, and a buyer has landed up with an unsound horse or an unsuitable horse, or is there any recourse that they could have?
There is recourse, but it's not an easy road to travel. So your recourse would be, unfortunately, either arbitrating, mediating, alternative dispute resolution, or going to the court. You would try and cancel the agreement. You could say to the seller, you've misrepresented this horse. Had I known X, Y, and Z about the horse, I wouldn't
I knew it had its tongue over the bits when
I would never have bought the horse in the
with the
first
bins.
place. And that information was the reason I did buy the horse, because you'll often find that. So somebody saying this horse wins every 90s class it jumps, and mommy wants to have her child win every 90s class, so she buys the horse without doing her homework and checking up on show jumping.
and without buying the child that was winning. You know,
Maybe
like,
that
that's
was
what
part
she
of the
should have
problem.
done.
Is then to say that was a clear misrepresentation. You would then have to go the route of saying, I want to cancel the agreement. Basically, I'll give you the horse back, you give me the purchase price back. The fact that these things haven't come up, or that they're not reported cases, makes me think that this hasn't often happened, or that if it happens, people both walk away unhappy about it. So often,
I think that's the definition of a good compromise, is everyone's been unhappy.
well, that's a good negotiation, yes. Everybody leaves very
I
upset.
think from a veterinary point of view as well, the cases that I have been involved in where there has been a straightforward return, whether it's been a refund or another horse is a different story, is being able to prove pre-existing.
Yeah.
So, you know, let's say they don't, it's not a legal requirement to x-ray a horse.
Okay. Yeah.
So
No, it's not,
you get
so-
the horse home, and 2 weeks later it's bucking or it's lame. You go to your vet, you do a workup, and it turns out it's got a great big chip with secondary arthritis in the joint. Now that takes months, if not years, to develop. So that it's easy. Any expert will sit there and say that pre-existed 3 months ago.
Yeah.
So that it's not easy. As you said, you have to invest lots of money going through the courts if the seller wants to be a bit uppity. But being able to prove a pre-existing condition is very helpful in furthering your case. But you need to prove it. But there is also a lot of it is subjective. So we've mentioned maybe the rider's not up to it. You know, maybe this actually is a quirky horse. And the rider can't ride half the horse.
In Janine's case, the from 1960, whatever, the seller actually turned around and said, well, I could ride that horse, so I assumed the buyer could ride it.
Yes,
That
I
was
saw
his
you
defense.
over the fence and you looked like you could ride, so I assumed you'd be able to ride the horse.
I think, sorry, there's another point that I do think that there is pathology that will only show itself with different riders. I think we often see that horrible condition, kissing spines, which is grossly overblamed for a lot of behavioral issues. But a rider may have learned how to ride their horse and be sympathetic to whatever that horse's problem may be.
And conditioned it.
It now goes to a new home, a new surface, a new riding calendar, schedule, trainer, saddle, and suddenly what wasn't a problem has become a problem. And I have seen that. I have often known the horse before and after and said, before, that horse never had a problem. Now it's got a problem. We knew it had kissing spines.
And
We
that's
might have
really
commented
interesting.
on it. But for some reason, the new rider, maybe it's posture, weight distribution, just weight. All of those have come to play and now brought a problem. That is now not the seller's problem.
No.
You know, and I will try and be fair and say, that's not the seller's. I knew this horse. This horse didn't do this before.
Well, I think also this is not the horse you bought. Whereas with a chip, that is the horse
Yes,
you bought.
exactly,
Yeah.
pre-existing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, it's messy. I think it's messy. You have to prove a lot of things. And it's an expensive process. And at the end of the day, there's maybe one little girl that's most upset about the fact that she really loves this horse and now she has to give it back. Because sometimes they just want to love the horse.
Yeah. Poor horses, they all deserve love.
But I think, Georgie, that's also why the Consumer Protection Act applying to something like horses would be really difficult. You know, if you think about a cooling off period, so after 6 months you can give back the goods.
But the Consumer Protection Act is 30 days.
But that's what I'm saying. But this is a horse. You know, it's not a
And a lot
dead-
can also happen to a horse in 30 days. You know,
Once
Well-
it gets on the horse box to travel to the new home, it's now out of the seller's.
Janine,